colleague Amy for setting up this afternoon's presentation. Although I should say, I realize it's this morning's presentation for most of you. It's about just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Here I'm coming to you from the County Antrim countryside, and I'm delighted to be able to speak to the Carnegie Library in Pittsburgh this afternoon. So thank you for all of you for tuning in as well. So the subject of my talk is looking at how to trace family connections to Ireland with a particular focus on the Scots-Irish. So what resources are there for those of you who want to find out more about your roots in Ireland, and how do you go about it? Where are the places to look? What are the sources to look at? Is there anything that's available online? What archives are out there that you need to perhaps visit if you want to pursue your family history further? So just to begin with, in terms of the Scots-Irish, now I'm aware that there are various terms for this particular people group. In fact, sometimes they're quite hard to define. They're Scots-Irish, they're Scotch-Irish, but in Ireland they're frequently called the Ulster Scots because they're predominantly found in the northern province of Ireland, the province of Ulster. The roots of these families can generally be found in Scotland, but at the same time, through intermarriage and mixing over the decades, there's obviously going to be an element of the Gaelic Irish and the English and even the Welsh in the families as well. So they're not, you might say, purely Scottish in terms of their roots. The roots could be a mixture of different groups and peoples and places. But the province of Ulster is the most northerly province in Ireland. It comprises 9 historic counties. 6 of those are in what's now Northern Ireland, and 3 are in what's now the Republic of Ireland. So Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan are part of the historic province of Ulster, but are now in the Republic of Ireland, while Antrim, Down, Londonderry, Tyrone, Armagh and Fermanagh are part of Northern Ireland. Now, in terms of the archives that you might want to look at, there are archives on both sides of you might say the modern political border that would be of relevance to you in researching your ancestors. Now, if you want to get a bit of background reading on the subject, there are many books that have been written on the Scots-Irish in Pennsylvania and elsewhere in America. So excellent books include anything by Kirby Miller, for instance. Patrick Griffin has written a really good book called The People with No Name, which takes a particular, or has a particular focus on Pennsylvania. And you might say the classic study of the actual migration of families from Ulster to colonial America is R.J. Dixon's book, simply titled Ulster Emigration to Colonial America, 1718 to 1775. Now, of course, migration began before 1718 and continued long after it as well. In fact, many more people emigrated from Ulster to America in the 19th century than did so in the 18th century. Now, the focus of my presentation today is particularly on the period from the very end of the 17th century through to, roughly speaking, the first quarter of the 19th century. So strong focus on the 18th century as a whole. Other books, have a look at Judith Ridner's book, The Scotch-Irish of Early Pennsylvania, A Varied People. And also, if you're particularly interested in Western Pennsylvania, then I'd strongly recommend Peter Gilmore's book, Irish Presbyterians and the Shaping of Western Pennsylvania, 1770 to 1830. So all of these will give you much background information on the Scots-Irish and Irish Presbyterians in general in colonial America, with a particular focus on Pennsylvania. Now, from the late 17th century onwards, families from Ulster were seeking a new life on the other side of the Atlantic. Much of the earliest focus of migration was in the Chesapeake Bay area, the eastern seaboard of the United States, Pennsylvania was very important, of course, very important from an early date for Quakers from Ireland. But figures such as Francis McKeamy, who came from County Donegal, born in Donegal in about 1658, emigrated to America in 1683, actually commissioned or ordained by the local presbytery in Ireland, his local presbytery in Ireland, the Lagan Presbytery, to go out to America. And there, a very influential ministry, really up the length of the eastern seaboard of what's now the United States, eventually resulted in the creation of the inaugural presbytery in America in 1706. So you might say that the birth in an institutional sense of the Presbyterian Church in America. And Francis McKeamy was hugely influential in the setting up of that presbytery in Philadelphia. So people like him, other ministers like him, but simply families who were going out, seeking a new life, new opportunities. Of course, some of it was driven by the situation for Presbyterians in Ireland, the fact that they did not enjoy the same rights as members of the established church, which was the Church of Ireland or Episcopal Church. For instance, in 1704, the Test Act was introduced to Ireland. So if you wanted to hold public office, if you wanted, in a sense, like a civil service position, or even a military position, or to hold a position on a municipal government in a town, you had to provide evidence that you had taken communion in a Church of Ireland church. And that was something, of course, that no Presbyterian in good conscience could do. Presbyterian marriages were not considered fully valid, and therefore the children born of such marriages were not considered legitimate. So for these and for other reasons, Presbyterians felt estranged from the state, from the state, the apparatus of the state. Now, of course, there was also the economic driver as well, a chance to establish a new life. Life was difficult in Ireland. It wasn't, of course, necessarily easier when they arrived in America, but certainly because of economic crises, agricultural depressions, falls off in the linen trade, for example, many families were pushed to the very edge of economic existence. And so there was the hope that perhaps a new life elsewhere would be better than the old life at home. And we find evidence of the migration of Ulster Scots or Scots-Irish into Pennsylvania in many different ways. Documents, I'll be talking about some of those in just a moment, but the place name evidence is so strong as well. It's really quite incredible to look across Pennsylvania and see so many place names that have an origin in Ireland. So again, Peter Gilmore has done some marvelous work on looking at place names in Pennsylvania with an origin in the province of Ulster. So we even take on the screen now part of Lancaster County, and you can see where Donegal is named. Raphoe is named. Raphoe is the name of a town and a parish in County Donegal. Mountjoy may be a reference to one of the major landowners in Ulster, including he owned extensive lands in County Donegal. William Stewart, Lord Mountjoy. But there are other place names. Just move across Pennsylvania and you'll find so many places that originate in Ulster. And the settlers, the migrants, were bringing these names with them and applying them to their new homes in Pennsylvania and elsewhere in the States as well. So we go right across Pennsylvania. You can see a place name. Again, Donegal appears as a place name, but Strabane. Well, I grew up near Strabane. I went to school in Strabane. So there is somewhere named after my local town where I grew up. So we can, it's really very interesting to look at the evidence for that across the state. So place name evidence is hugely important in pointing towards the origins of families in Ulster. And of course, one of the most famous residents of Pittsburgh in the 19th century was Thomas Mellon, who grew up in this cottage that's now might say the centerpiece of the Ulster American Folk Park near Omagh in County Tyrone. He was only a young boy actually when he left there in 1818, but he continued his interest in his place of origin, and then as a much older man, as quite an elderly man, he actually made a return visit to the cottage, and he describes it in some detail. It clearly, as he calls it, his mental map of where he had spent his very earliest years had been burned deep into his psyche. So the origins of families in some cases can be taken back to the very cottage in which they originated. In other cases, maybe we can find out a general area, a parish, for example, or a townland. So there are ways of taking families right back from where they were living in America, right back to their place of origin in Ireland. I'm going to be looking at some ways of doing that. So first of all, in terms of archives, places that hold records of relevance. Well, the most important archive for the Scotch-Irish, for Ulster families in general, is the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. It's based in Belfast. It's in Titanic Quarter in Belfast. It's a relatively new facility. And I mean, the Public Record Office itself was founded back in the early 1920s, but the current office was opened in 2011. And it's a wonderful place to do research. You turn up, bring photo ID with you, you get signed in, you get a reader's ticket, and then you can go upstairs and you can explore the collections. Now, one of Prony's great strengths is the fact that it combines both public records, as in, say, government records, such as departmental papers, education records, hospital records, and so on, with privately deposited records. So those are records deposited by private individuals or private institutions. Institutions could be, for example, the churches. Many church records are in Prony, as I'll explain in a moment. So Prony's great strength is that it's almost like a one-stop shop for anyone looking for Ulster ancestors. Now, that's not the only place, but for most researchers, Prony has the great majority of records that are available in the public domain. Now, having said that, there are, of course, other institutions where you can do research in Ireland. In Dublin, for instance, there's the National Archives of Ireland, which fulfills a similar function to Prony in that it's a state archive, but it has many privately deposited records as well. There's also the National Library of Ireland in Dublin. And across Ireland, there are many local archives, county archives, or county museums or county libraries that have collections of original source material that you may want to look at. And many of these institutions are working to catalogue these records very well and to make an increasing number of them available online. So in terms of Prony's collection, some of the most important records that you'll want to look at in Prony will be church records and landed estate papers. I'll take church records first, but landed estate papers can be so helpful to you looking for your farming ancestors in Ireland. Now, as well as one of Prony's great strengths being the breadth of the records that it contains, another of its great strengths is the detail with which those records have been catalogued. So Prony, in the old Prony, which was located in another part of Belfast, the main search room was wall to wall with paper catalogues, bound paper catalogues called calendars. And the archivists in Prony had really drilled down into the records. They had listed many items at an individual record. So certainly, yes, in Prony, sometimes you do order out a box of documents, but in many cases you can order out an individual item and view it without having to burrow your way through a box of items or maybe several boxes of items. So the Prony catalogue is available online for anyone to use. So the link is on the screen now. So the Prony e-catalogue has captured digitally the information that was in the old paper catalogues in Prony, and it's now the main way of finding out what's in that archive. So I just took, for instance, Pittsburgh, and you'll notice that I've spelled it without the H at the end because some records in Prony will have Pittsburgh without the H, others will have it with the H. If you add an asterisk, it will search both Pittsburgh ending in G, and Pittsburgh ending in H. So I just put that in just as an example. So it actually returned 185 results in the Prony e-catalogue for Pittsburgh. And these cover a broad period of time. So the very first one, for example, is from 1954. And in fact, it's 1954, 55, 56. CAB, those are cabinet papers. They relate to the cabinet of the old government of Northern Ireland. But we come down further, you'll see a number of records beginning with D. Now, anything prefixed D in Prony is an original privately deposited document. Okay, so not an official, not a government record, but a record deposited by private individual or private institution. And you notice D592, and then there's a slash, /10, 13, 16, and so on. Those are a part of a collection to do with the Hazelton family in Pittsburgh. And so there's a letter, for example, from 1810, written by William Hazelton in Pittsburgh, and several others as well. If you follow it down, there's actually letters from even earlier, from 1809. Now, the Hazelton family were from Ulster, and interestingly, in a book edited principally by Kirby Miller and a number of colleagues, Irish Immigrants in the Land of Canaan, he transcribes one of those Hazelton letters, and he provides much contextual information on the Hazelton family and their background in Ulster and their connection with Pittsburgh. So that's certainly an excellent book to get hold of, just in terms of getting a feeling for primary source material, Irish Immigrants in the Land of Canaan. But that one image just gives you an impression of just the range of material, and the fact that there are 185 items in the Prony catalogue relating to Pittsburgh alone. I could have put in Pennsylvania, and there would have been many, many more. Another of the resources available through the Prony website is the name search database. And the name search database includes transcriptions of a number of, you could call them census substitutes. Okay, and Ireland, unfortunately, the earliest complete census in the modern sense of what a census is only dates from 1901. Now, there were censuses every year, every 10 years in Ireland, rather, from 1821, but largely speaking, they were destroyed. Okay, 1841 to 51, almost completely destroyed. 1861 to 91, virtually nothing at all survives for those census returns. But from the 18th century, there are a number of lists of names that could be described as census substitutes. So from 1740, there's what's called the Census of Protestant Householders. Now, it's not available for everywhere in Ulster. It's particularly good for parts of Donegal, for County Londonderry, and for the northern part of County Antrim. But even so, even at that, there's still over 12,000 names in it. There was a religious census taken in 1766, which was commissioned by the Irish House of Lords, and Church of Ireland clergymen were given responsibility for gathering the data. Again, it's somewhat hit and miss in terms of what's available. In general, the original records were destroyed, but transcriptions may be available, but certainly worth checking out. At least worth checking out just in case something of relevance pops up in it. A place, a name, a surname, and a place name. That's the combination you want when you're looking for your ancestors. Now, church records. I've mentioned church records are among the most useful of genealogical sources for those looking for their ancestors in Ireland, whether Scots-Irish or Ulster Irish or Gaelic Irish. So church records are, of course, for the most part, they're private records. The records are owned by the actual churches themselves, the institutions themselves. But Prony and other archives in Ireland have been very active in going out, looking for records, getting permission from the churches to microfilm those records and to make those available for researchers. So the work of the Public Record Office in Belfast in terms of church records, their efforts over the years has meant that the great majority of church records that are available in some format can be accessed in Prony. Usually it'll be on microfilm. There are certainly original records as well. And in more recent times, Prony has been digitizing church records. Now, those can be viewed on computers in Prony. They can't be viewed, on the Prony website or anything like that. But certainly for visitors to Prony, you can now get access to digitized copies of some church records. But for the most part, still at the moment, it's going to be records available on microfilm. The reason church records are so important for Irish research is that, as I've mentioned already, the earliest complete census for Ireland is only from 1901, and the official keeping of births and deaths in Ireland dates only from 1864. So once you get back before 1864, if you're looking for a birth of an ancestor, typically you'll be looking at church records to try and find a record of their baptism. Now, in general, most church records don't begin until the early 19th century. In some cases, it's a result of earlier records being destroyed. In other cases, it simply lacks record keeping. At the same time, you can find records going right back into the late 17th century for some churches in the province of Ulster and for elsewhere in Ireland as well. Occasionally, you can find even other unusual items. So on the screen now is a page from a funeral register of the first Presbyterian church in Belfast, beginning in 1712. Now, what this is, it's not, you might say, a burial register in the traditional sense of the word. Rather, it's a record of the hiring out of items you would need for a funeral. So if somebody in a family had died, a family member would come to the church and they would borrow what they needed for the funeral. Maybe, for example, a morgue cloth, for example, a pall. So something they would need. And then a record of that was kept along with the payment made. So it recorded who had died. It recorded the name of the person who was then coming to hire out what they needed, and it records the payments made for the borrowing of those items. So that's an unusual item. It's very rare. It's really unique for that period, actually. But it's remarkable what still survives. And so it's clear as well, incidentally, that it wasn't just members of that congregation who were borrowing the items. People were coming from a wider area to Belfast to borrow the items for their funeral, which maybe took place, 30, 40 miles from Belfast. So look out for things like that. With church records, as I often emphasize, it's not just about baptisms and marriages and maybe burials. There are other items as well that can reveal something of our ancestors. So, particularly with regard to the Presbyterian Church, there are many tiers of administration within the Presbyterian Church. So within a local congregation, you'll have a session, the kirk session, made up of the minister and elders. Then you'll have a presbytery, which comprises representatives from a number of congregations within a defined geographical area. And then, of course, at the very top in the Presbyterian structure, you'll have the Synod of Ulster, or what becomes the General Assembly in 1840. So each of these tiers of government within the Presbyterian Church generates records. And sometimes those records survive, and sometimes those records go right back into the 17th century. So, for example, on the left-hand side of the slide now, you can see a page from the minutes of the Lagan Presbytery. This was a presbytery that comprised County Donegal and adjoining portions of counties Tyrone and Londonderry, even for Fermanagh for that sake as well. This was the presbytery, in fact, that sent out Francis McKinney from Donegal to America in 1683. So within the records of the presbytery, you can find a broad range of different items. I mean, very often if something couldn't be resolved at congregational level, it would be referred to presbytery to deliberate over. So there's a wealth of information contained in the Presbytery records. And then if you want to look at a record for a particular Presbyterian congregation, for Achadui, a congregation in the north of County Londonderry, not far from Coleraine, there is a Kirk session book beginning in 1702 and running up to the early 1760s. And that, again, comprises so much information. I mean, essentially, the Kirk session sat as a court deliberating on a range of different matters. And so people who transgressed the rules of the church might be brought up and disciplined, but even matters that would be often dealt with by civil courts could end up being deliberated over by the Kirk session. So people would seek arbitration or seek justice through the Kirk session if there was a dispute of some kind, whatever financial or whatever it might have been with somebody else in the congregation. You'll also find information on the care of the poor. So the particular image on the screen now for Achadui is a page of listing the names of the poor and the monies that they were given by the congregation. So we've got various names. We come down, we've got Martha McZaney, who's up there at the top, might be McKinney actually. Come further down, then there's somebody's named simply as the orphan. Okay, sadly, no name, simply the orphan. But we have others. We've got George McFarlane, for example, James Wall, we've got a John McNeil, for instance. So these are people who were given financial assistance by the congregation of Achadui in 1713. So people who were very often will escape the written record may well turn up in the pages of a Kirk session book. Now, where these records survive, they're oft, or I might say, survive and are publicly available, it will very often be in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. The original of the Achadui session book is held by the Presbyterian Historical Society in Belfast, but a digital copy of it is available for researchers in Prony. And the Presbyterian Historical Society has got, quite a number of unique Presbyterian records. In other words, records that are only available there and can't be accessed in another archive such as Prony. For anyone looking for ancestors in Ulster, I'd also refer you to the vestry books, vestry minute books. Now, the vestry was a body within the parish. It was like an arm of civil government. Although the records were actually held by the Church of Ireland, and typically the Church of Ireland minister presided at vestry meetings, vestry minute books can contain information about people from all religious and social backgrounds in Ireland. And they're a very useful substitute for the loss of other church records. So even if you're looking for, although the records are maintained by the Church of Ireland, if you're looking for Presbyterian or Methodist or Catholic ancestors, have a look at the vestry minute books. Again, if they're available in the public domain, the likelihood is that they'll be available in some form in Prony, sometimes on microfilm, sometimes in original format. So what can you find in a vestry minute book? Well, as I said, it was essentially it dealt with the business of the parish. So typically the vestry met maybe 2 or 3 times during the year. The most important of the meetings was held after Easter Sunday, so on the Monday or the Tuesday after Easter Sunday. So you'll find the names of people who were present at vestry meetings. They will sign the vestry book to indicate they were present. You get the names of persons who are appointed to carry out parish business. Now, that could be those who were responsible for looking after the destitute, the elderly, looking after an orphan, maybe taking an orphan to the Foundling Hospital in Dublin. It could be the name of the parish sexton who looked after the church and the graveyard. It could be a grave digger, for instance. Many people can appear in the pages of a vestry book simply because they were commissioned or appointed to carry out some particular role within the parish. The parish was responsible, for instance, for road repairs within its bounds. So you'll often find details about who was appointed to repair a particular stretch of road. And details like that can sometimes be, so-and-so is to repair the road from such and such a person's house to such and such a person's house. So even incidentally, a lot of detail can be found in the pages of a vestry book. You might get the names of those paying the parish cess or the parish tax. Okay, so this was a tax that financed the activities of the parish. So sometimes you may find a listing of the names of the taxpayers, along with where they lived and the amount that they were expected to pay. The parish looked after the poor. So you might find the names of poor parishioners who received alms or financial support from the parish. And you might even, in some cases, find the names of seat holders in the Church of Ireland church, because, of course, where you sat in church was a reflection of where you were in society. So the richest people sat in the grandest seats at the front of the church, and the poor stood or maybe sat on benches at the back, and then the middling sort of people were in the middle of the church. So vestry books can be hugely helpful in looking for your ancestors. A drawback, of course, is the fact that they tend not to be indexed, and you're dealing with 18th century handwriting or 19th century handwriting, so they can be a challenge, but at the same time, they can reveal information that you may not find elsewhere. Now, if you want to get to grips with what Prony has in particular with regard to church records, you can download as a PDF from the Prony website the Prony Guide to Church Records. This lists all of the available records held in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. It's a massive document. It's about 350 A4 pages. Huge detail. So it names the church. It gives it covering dates of like baptisms and marriages and burials and other items such as vestry books, and gives the Prony references to them as well. It also includes some of the records held by the Presbyterian Historical Society, but not all of them. It includes some, but not all of the records held by the Presbyterian Historical Society. So, I mean, just to take one example on the screen now, for First Antrim Presbyterian Church, also known as Mill Row in Antrim, there are actually baptisms going back to 1677. Now, that's very unusual. That would be certainly the earliest Presbyterian records in Ulster. But at the same time, if your ancestor was from the parish or town of Antrim and they belong to this congregation, you may find information on them going back over 300 years. Marriages, slightly earlier, they begin in 1675. Now that, as I said, that's early. There's no doubt about that. But still, at the same time, it shows you what may be found through searching church records in Ulster. Now, of course, a proportion of these records will be available online. There are various organizations and even private individuals who have been indexing church records. The Roots Ireland website is a good place to start. It represents the various members of the Irish Family History Foundation, the county-based genealogical centres. But there may be simply a private individual who has been working away assiduously in cataloguing and transcribing records. So probably the best way is somebody go to, say, Google, for instance, and look for a particular church to see if the records are available online. In some cases, the church itself may have digitized the records and put those records on its own website. Something else to keep an eye out for, especially with regard to Presbyterians, are congregational histories or even parish histories. Now, there's a well-established tradition within Ireland of writing up the history of a parish or a church or a congregation. And so these books contain a wealth of information. Information that's been gathered by some cases by an author over a lifetime, and which has been presented in book form. And often books like this will include information that's not easily available elsewhere. Many of them will have appendices listing, details taken from church records, for example, or maybe records that are still held by the church and are not in the public domain. So look out for a history of the parish or congregation or church, where your ancestors originated. You may well find details in those books that you wouldn't find elsewhere, would struggle to find elsewhere. Now, moving on to landed estate papers. So church records, vitally important when it comes to looking for ancestors. Another very important category of record are landed estate papers. Now, to understand why landed estate papers are so important, we must remember that in Ireland, up until the late 19th century, in fact, into the early 20th centuries, farmers did not own their land. They were tenants on an estate. Okay, so they weren't owners of the land they worked. They simply were tenants paying rent to a landlord in order to occupy their farms. And for many people, one of the attractions of going to America was a chance to own land. And so, rather being a tenant to actually being an owner of land. But in Ireland, 17th, 18th, 19th, for some people even into the early 20th century, farmers were tenants. And the records generated by the management of these landed estates form a vast collection of records that in many cases are available for researchers to use. So in Ireland, certainly when it comes to Ulster, the province of Ulster, the best place to start looking is the Public Record Office in Belfast. It is a fabulous collection of landed estate papers going right back, in some cases back even before the 17th century, but generally speaking, records from the 17th century onwards. The National Library of Ireland in Dublin has another fabulous collection of landed estate papers. And similarly, the county archives or libraries and museums also have collections of landed estate papers. Now, the availability of these records, of course, depends on many things. Much has been lost, of course. I mean, many records simply discarded or burnt because somebody simply felt they were no longer of any value. But it's still amazing just how many records have survived and which can be found in public institutions. So, I mean, just on the screen now is a beautiful map of the estate of Robert Colville in the parish of Cumber in County Down. And this is from 1721. It's beautifully coloured. And from a genealogical perspective, what the researcher wants to find are the names of the tenants, farmers. And you can see in this map, not only does it map out the townlands, the land units, it actually names the occupiers of the farms. So we know, for example, who was in the townland of Ballyrickard in 1721, over 300 years ago. We see the name of that tenant, John McMeekin, actually named on this map. Now, other records include, I'll talk more about leases in a moment, but rent books or rentals recording the names of tenants and the rent that they paid to occupy their farms. So this is just one I pulled out. This is for the Langford estate in County Antrim. This is a rental from 1774. And it's annotated. You can see the little notes in the far right-hand column. And I've just pulled up one of those. Hugh Brown. Okay, there's a note that a letter from said Brown to John Robb dated the 20th of September 1775 at Philadelphia. Okay, so there's Hugh Brown, who's named in this particular document, and there's a comment that in 1775 he's in Philadelphia. So the rental was drawn up in 1774, but then it's annotated to add in additional information. And so we know that Hugh Brown had emigrated to America prior to that date. Now, if you want to find out the name of the estate on which your ancestors live, and that's of course crucial. If you're going to make the most of landed estate papers, you have to know the name of the landed estate on which your farming ancestors lived. Well, my colleague Andrew Kane at the Ulster Historical Foundation has written an absolutely marvellous book called The Townland Atlas of Ulster, in which he lists all 16,000 townlands in the province of Ulster. So a townland being, you might say, the smallest administrative unit. Across the 9 counties of Ulster are there more than 16,000 of these. So he's got a full list of these. But brilliantly in this book, he has maps of all of the townlands indicating the landed estate that each one belonged to. So it's a really marvellous sort. And once you know the name of the person who owned the townland, the landlord who owned the townland, then you can see if there are papers available for that estate, whether in Prony or in an archive in Dublin or an archive in another part of Ireland. So that's the best place to start if you want to find out who owned the estate, who owned the townland in which my ancestor lived. I want to talk about one particular category of records you'll find within land estate papers. And these are leases for lives. So a lease was a contract between the landlord and tenant. So a landlord would issue a lease to a tenant, and that set out various details. For example, how much rent was the tenant to pay? What were the other conditions to be fulfilled? So the lease will also set out its duration. Okay, so at what point would the lease terminate? And often you'll have leases for a term of years. So typically for farmers, you would have a lease for 21 or 31 years. You could also have a lease for lives. Now, a lease for lives was a lease that would not expire until certain individuals, identified by name in the lease, had died. So as long as though one of those individuals was alive, the lease was still valid. And typically there were 3 lives in the lease. You could have leases for 1 life, you could have leases for even 5 lives, but typically you would have a lease for 3 lives. And from a genealogical perspective, what's so useful about leases for lives is the fact that the lives were often the names of the tenant farmer and 2 of his children. And if the children were named, it usually gave their ages. So the farmer might name, let's say a farmer is called John Smith. He's one of the lives. As long as John was alive, the lease was valid. And as long as his 2 children, say James Smith and Jane Smith, James aged 6, Jane aged 4, as long as they were alive, the lease was still valid. As long as at least one of them was alive, the lease was still valid. And a lease for lives was certainly advantageous for the farmer because a lease for lives could last for, well, say Jane was 4 and she lived to be 64, well, that lease would last for 60 years. So from a tenant farmer's point of view, a lease for lives was certainly worth holding on to. The issue for landlords, however, was keeping track of those lives. So what, for example, would happen if, say, Jane got married and then she had a new surname? So he would have to make a note, well, Jane is married to so-and-so and she now lives at whatever the place might be. But even more of an issue, what if the person named as a life emigrated? Because it didn't matter where in the world they were living, as long as they were alive, whether it was in Ulster or America, Australia, or wherever it might be, the lease was still valid. So landlords had to keep track of that sort of information. And for tenant farmers as well, they had to be able to provide evidence that the person named as lives were still in the land of the living. This is where I came across a very interesting reference through the Prony catalogue. This is from 1817. The Prony reference is D1470/6/37, and it's a deposition before a JP in the county of Westmoreland in Pennsylvania of Adam Freen that he is one of the lives in a lease granted to his father by Earl O'Neill for a farm in Achbador. Okay, so first glance, we have a legal document concerning someone who's now in Pennsylvania, but who had been named as a lease, named as a life in a lease granted to his own father for a farm back in Ireland. So I thought, well, that has to be explored a bit further. Now, to provide some background to that, the O'Neills were among the major landowners in County Antrim. They were one of the very few surviving Gaelic Irish families to retain most of their lands after 1600. They had a magnificent castle at Shane's Castle in County Antrim, not far from the town of Antrim, and looking out over Lough Neagh. Sadly, in 1816, that castle was destroyed in a major fire, and only the ruins that still survive are there to this day. Not only did it destroy the house, it's also supposed to have destroyed all of the family's documents, all of the records relating to the management of their vast estate. They had a estate of tens of thousands of acres. So the records of that estate were destroyed in 1816. And it is true that actually of the many landed estates in Ulster, almost nothing is available in the public domain for the O'Neills of Shane's Castle estate. However, we have that particular deposition. So there it is. I ordered it out in Prony and I copied it. And I should say that in Prony, you can take photographs of documents, whether on you have a camera or a phone or whatever, you can snap away and you can record so much, and then you can browse it from once you get home or at the end of the day. So that's the document. So here's a document drawn up in Westmoreland County. I will say that the name is not actually Frean as it appears in the catalogue. The name is actually Frew, F-R-E-W, which is a fairly common name in that area. So I've studied this, and let me just give you a summary of what it says. So in that document, just summarize, he is the same Adam Frew that was and is one of the lives of a lease granted to his father, Charles Frew, by Sir Charles O'Neill of Shane's Castle. In fact, he wasn't Sir Charles, but that's another matter. He was simply Charles O'Neill of Shane's Castle. And further saith that the farm so granted by lease was situated in the townland of Achnadore, County Antrim. And in the same deposition, Adam Frew adds that he had emigrated to Pennsylvania in 1766. He'd been living in Westmoreland County for 26 or 27 years, and he believed that he was about 75 or 76 years of age. The importance of this for Adam's family, and they were still in occupation on the farm back home, is that although perhaps the original documents relating to the lease were destroyed in that fire in 1816, remember this is 1817, I don't think it's purely coincidental that this document is drawn up a year after the fire destroyed Shane's Castle. But here we have information provided by Adam. First of all, he's still alive. Very important. That means the lease is still valid. And giving details then of a more incidental nature, but nonetheless extremely useful, that he had emigrated to Pennsylvania in 1766, and he'd been living where he was living now for more than a quarter of a century. And remember, he's making this deposition more than 50 years after he had left Ireland. The original lease doesn't survive, but we know that it must have been made sometime prior to his departure from Ireland in 1766. So something like this turning up in Prony can reveal so much about a particular family and provides an entry point for exploring things further. Now, where's Achnadore? Well, Prony has also created a marvellous resource, the Historical Maps Viewer. And this allows you to pinpoint precisely the location of every townland in the 6 counties that now make up Northern Ireland. So that's the home page, or the map, the main map. So you can burrow in, so put in the name of the townland, you can drill down, and there we have it. So the town of Achnadore is just outside the village, or small town of Brashane, in the middle part of County Antrim. So it's about, well, it's just a short distance east of the larger town of Ballymena. And so there it is. We can see exactly where this townland is. Not necessarily exactly where the farm is, because the farm would have been a subdivision of the townland, but still, at least we know that that's where Adam Frew originated. And then that provides an entry point to further research into this family history. Just over a year ago, a new facility was created on FamilySearch.org, the full text search. Now, I use it a lot. It's an absolutely marvelous resource. It really is. And it provides access to so many records, not simply, records from various resources. So records that originated in Ireland, for example, have been copied by FamilySearch, as well as many records in other parts of the world that have been copied. So it allows a way of searching for records that simply didn't exists before it, and it's enhanced the facility for searching for records. So I'm always having a look at this and just putting in search terms and seeing what I can find. And it's amazing what can turn up. So in Allegheny County deeds, I came across this really interesting document. I've just got the very start of it. It goes on in much more detail. But it says this indenture made the 13th day of September in the year of our Lord, 1807, between James McClure of Lisbury, parish of Kilrats, barony of Dunluce, and county of Antrim in the Kingdom of Ireland, and Mary Ann McClure, alias Tweed, his wife. And then we have by John McClure, or John Moore, rather, of the County of Allegheny and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, their attorney. Okay, so it concerns a particular property described as being in Chartiers Creek near Coal Pit Run. And thanks to our good friend, Mary Jane Convener Hurt, she went out one day and she found where Chartiers Creek near Coal Pit Run is. And it appears in that same map I showed earlier as well, or at least Chartiers Creek does, from 1792, which is all the many place names from Ulster on it. So it means that, we have this document and we know where the property was in Pennsylvania. But what's interesting is that James McClure and his wife, Mary Ann, are not actually in Pennsylvania when they make this deed. They have an attorney, they have somebody who's representing them. But where are they from? It says parish, if I go back, it says Lisbury, parish of Kilrats, barony of Dunluce, county of Antrim. Okay, so a barony is a subdivision of a county, and we know it's the parish of Kilrats, which is a parish in North County Antrim. And then where is Lisbury? So it gives very precise information as to where James McClure is at that moment in time. So again, going back to the Prony Historical Map Viewer, I've highlighted the parish of Kilrats in North County Antrim. Again, it's a parish that's just to the, it's to the north of Ballymena, but it would be just to the east of Ballymoney. And Lisbury is obviously a subdivision of that townland. In fact, there is no actual townland called Lisbury. There is, however, a townland called Lisboy. So not Lisbury, but there is a townland called Lisboy, Lisboy. And just from a personal view, this is very interesting in the sense that this is where my mother-in-law grew up. This is where her family farm was. Now, she wasn't a McClure, but can we find out anything more about the McClures? Well, we know now that this is where James McClure was when he drew up that deed in the early 19th century, and that had implications for property he owned in Pennsylvania. But is there anything else can be found about him? Well, not to go into too much detail. Again, this is a jumping off point into that family, but there is a very useful resource for the northern part of County Antrim and for much of County Down. It's the 1803 agricultural census. It was drawn up in response to fears of a French invasion of Ireland. This, of course, was during the period of the Napoleonic Wars, and concerns that the French army would invade Ireland resulted in officials drawing up information on the names of farmers, principally in coastal parishes, though in some cases they do come a fair distance inland, recording the livestock and the dead stock that each one possessed. So the livestock being obviously the cattle and the sheep and the horses and so on that they possessed, the dead stock being crops that they had harvested and were in storage. So for parishes in the northern part of County Antrim, and for quite a few parishes in County Down, there are surviving returns. The records for North Antrim are in the National Archives of Ireland. The records for County Down are in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. Searching through this, I was able to find quite a number of McClures in the townland of Lisboy in the parish of Kilrats. Now, it's interesting, there was a real concentration of the name McClure in this townland. Most of the McClures in the County Antrim census of 1803 are found in Lisboy townland. In fact, we see two Jameses, as well as a J. McClure. Maybe he was a James as well. But there we have information on families named McClure in that parish. Now, whether one of these Jameses really was the James who makes that deed, because clearly the James who makes the deed had been in Pennsylvania at some point, had acquired land, and then had returned home and was disposing of the land that he had acquired while he was in Pennsylvania. So there's a story there, certainly. It's interesting that in 1798 there was a rebellion in Ireland, the United Irishmen's rebellion in Ireland, and many people from this part of County Antrim, as well as elsewhere in Ulster and Ireland, had actually gone to America to escape the Troubles. Maybe they had been accused of being involved in the rebellion, or even in the period leading up to the rebellion, or maybe they were banished to America, for example. I'm only speculating. I have no evidence for that. Still has to be found. But maybe James McClure was one of those who had to get out of Ireland around about 1798. They'd gone to Pennsylvania, had acquired some property there. But once things had settled down in Ireland, maybe he felt it was safe for him to return. Now, I have no firm evidence for that. I'm only speculating. But still, it is a potential scenario to explain how James McClure ended up in Pennsylvania, and then he's back home in the parish of Kilrats. So that's just, you might say, potential for jumping off from records stateside into records back here, and for following the stories of families from one side of the Atlantic to the other and seeing what can be found. So there's certainly so much potential out there for those of you looking for your ancestors. So, I encourage you to keep going. You never know what you'll find until you start looking. So I'm going to stop at this point. I'll stop sharing and I'll hand back to Ellie.
Thank you so much for your expertise and your knowledge. You have some incredible resources that I was able to pull up in your talk, as well as in that handout that you offered us. So thank you all for joining us today as well for this program. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and I will read them out loud, or William, you're also welcome to head into the chat and read them yourself. So if you have any questions,
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes, please ask. I will try to answer those.
While we are waiting for some of those to come through in the chat, I do have one that I can ask you. I'm wondering how all of these census records got destroyed. If so many are missing, was it in one
Yes,
batch or just over the year?
that's yes, a very good question. Very good question. So, in Ireland, unfortunately, in 1922, the Public Record Office of Ireland was destroyed. This is at the start of the Irish Civil War, and unfortunately, a catastrophic explosion and fire destroyed the Public Record Office of Ireland. So many records were destroyed, to the point where some people think, well, there's no point of looking for my Irish ancestors. All the records were destroyed. Well, much was destroyed, but so much still survives. So three main categories of record from a genealogical perspective were destroyed in 1922 in the Public Record Office. First of all, Church of Ireland, parish records of baptisms and marriages and burials were destroyed. The reason they were in the Public Record Office and destroyed is because up until 1871, the Church of Ireland was the state or the established church in Ireland. And so its records were counted as public records. And so many local parishes deposited their records for safekeeping in the Public Record Office in Dublin. Sadly, they were destroyed. Secondly, virtually all original wills in Ireland were destroyed in 1922. Now, that's slightly offset by the fact that there are many transcriptions of wills before 1858, before the state took over responsibility for wills. After 1858, there are copies of most of the original wills kept by the district probate registries. But still, before 1858, sadly, most original copies of wills were destroyed. And then thirdly, in the destruction of the public record of 1922, you have the loss of virtually all of the 1821, 31, 41, and 51 census returns. The records for 1861, 71, 81, and 91 were destroyed at a different time. Some of them were pulped as scrap paper during the First World War. But unfortunately, it adds up to the fact that most 19th century census returns were destroyed. The earliest complete census is 1901. Having said that, quite a number of transcriptions and copies, and even sometimes original copies of census records especially from 21 to 51, are available in some format in the archives in Ireland. But certainly, sadly, the great majority of records were destroyed.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer. We have a question in the chat from Eileen. What religion are the Scots-Irish? Only Protestant?
Yes, again, that's a very good question as well. Now, generally speaking, the religious affiliation most associated with the Scots-Irish was Presbyterian. Now, of course, Presbyterian is not one single religious denomination as well. You've got, you might say, the main body. Well, certainly, I'm thinking of Ireland. What you have is the main body of Presbyterians who were affiliated to the Synod of Ulster. But you also have Covenanters or Reformed Presbyterians. And you also have another religious denomination that no longer exists today, because most of them joined with the main body of Presbyterians, of the Seceders. And certainly these different religious groupings found in Ireland, and then as a result of migration, they were established in America as well. So the religion most associated with Scots-Irish is Presbyterian, but certainly not limited to them. So what I would say about if you're looking for an ancestor is don't discount the fact that your ancestor may have belonged to another religious denomination, whether Episcopalian, Church of Ireland, or Methodist, or Catholic, or Quaker, or whatever. So if you're looking for records in Ireland, I would say look at all of the available church records for the parish in which your ancestors lived, if you know that parish. So don't focus exclusively on the records of one particular church. Take a very broad approach to church records and looking for your ancestors.
I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat yet, but we do have some words of thanks coming in from a couple of folks saying that it's been a great presentation, that they appreciate the photos and maps, and that someone else says that they attended a Zoom roundtable a few weeks ago presented by the Maine Ulsters, Scots, and Dave McCausland. Oh, we have one question coming in. It seems like it is a three-parter from Deborah. First is, what are the best starting points for ancestors who lived in Ireland for 100 years before immigrating to America in 1732? Secondly, are there ship manifests for ships carrying emigres to America? And thirdly, are there records of Scots coming to Ireland?
Okay, let me take those in reverse order. So are there records of Scots coming to Ireland, not in the sense of records of people, say, getting on a boat in Scotland and getting off a boat in Ireland. We can follow certain pathways of families from Scotland into Ireland through a number of resources. It's usually, it must be said, for the most part, it's very difficult to take a family in Ireland back to a very specific location in Scotland. That is difficult. It can be done in a few instances, but generally speaking, it's very difficult. Again, the main reason is the absence of the records that you would need to use for that. So in terms of the question, are the records of the Scots coming to Ireland? There are records certainly of the Scots once they've arrived in Ireland, but if you're thinking of records of their actual transit from Scotland to Ireland, no, sadly, there really aren't records of that. Secondly, then, are there ships manifests for ships carrying emigres to America? So no, sadly not either in that sense. Official records of people leaving Ireland and Britain, remembering, of course, that Ireland was part of the United Kingdom from, well, 1801 till 1922, but no records of people, official records of people leaving Britain and Ireland before 1890. However, in some instances, you will find newspaper advertisements or news items reporting the names of passengers in some ships. The reason those appear in newspapers is because sometimes the passengers on a ship, some of them got together and they wrote a letter of thanks to the captain for his good conduct towards them, how he had brought them safely to America. And some of those were published in newspapers. So it's still only representing a fraction of the number of people who actually crossed the Atlantic in the 18th century. But occasionally you can find those. So the earliest newspaper in Ulster is the Belfast Newsletter. It began publication in 1737. It's still being published today. There is an online index to all surviving issues from 1738 to 1800 on the University of Louisiana website. You can also get access to it through the online British Newspaper Archive. So look out for that. Sometimes you can find the names of passengers if they were signing a letter of thanks to the captain for transferring them safely across the Atlantic. The best starting points for ancestors who lived in Ireland for 100 years before emigrated in 1732. Well, that's pretty early. That's back before, sadly, many of the records I've talked about are available in plentiful format. There will certainly be those records, but it's a quantity of them. There's some things I'd suggest you have a look at. First of all, have a look at any of the online indexes I have talked about. So the Family Search Full Text Search Facility, for example, the Prony Catalog, online e-catalog, the Prony Name Search Catalog. You're trying to gather as much information about names and locations as possible. And once you maybe have a fairly good idea of at least areas that you could focus on, then you could do more in-depth research. So you could, for example, see if, well, have a look at the Guide to Church Records produced by Prony and see if there are any early church records, congregational records, or vestry books, as I've highlighted. So certainly it's not easy once you get back into the early 18th century, but at the same time, it's not impossible, but it is challenging.
We have another question. If a person was born in Scotland, why would they claim Irish and not Scottish? When they immigrated, they say Irish. And then for context, it says mother was born in Scotland, father in Ireland, children born in Scotland for the early 1900s.
Yes, I mean, I don't know in this very specific case. I mean, it's just speculate or just putting out a general comment that may not apply in this case, but could apply for other families. Perhaps someone else was filling in the form and they put down incorrect information, or perhaps somebody was filling it in and they consciously wrote Irish rather than Scottish, perhaps because they had the rest of the family was Irish and it was maybe just easier to do that. In this case, it says mother was born in Scotland, father in Ireland, but children were born in Scotland. That makes it slightly maybe more puzzling that the person would claim to be Irish rather than Scottish. I can't, I'm afraid I just can't answer the very specific example in this case adequately. But in general terms, it could be a mistake or maybe somebody consciously writing Irish rather than Scottish.
I am not seeing any more questions, so maybe we'll do another minute or so just to see if there's any last minute questions that filter in. in that case, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. So we will stop that.